All right, Shabbosai, good morning, a good tavach. It is an incredible schus Baruch Hashem to be able to begin another week of learning together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Elul Haba Aleinu L'Tova, Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in honor of their children and all of the Suburban sons and daughters beginning their year of study in Eretz Yisroel. May their Torah study and mitzvos in the Holy Land merit the release of our precious hostages, of the success of our soldiers, the return to their families, and the arrival of Moshiach, tzidkeuni, bimheira, b'yameinu. Amen. Our week of learning sponsor Shmuel Shira Artman, in appreciation for the entire community's outpouring of love and support towards the Links organization. Halavai Meretz Hashem, all of our beautiful organizations in town, out of town, should continue to perform their overwhelming and beautiful chasadim on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael. And I will say, of course, it's always there's always one of these fascinating dynamics, right? We followed the news over Shabbos and Erev Shabbos into Shabbos, and some literally following the news on Shabbos itself. Apparently, I was the last one in the shul to know that Nasrallah was actually killed. But an incredible, overwhelming thing. We have to ask ourselves: so what is the avoda? Right? What is it that we should do when we see such a tremendous miracle that has occurred for our people? I'll just tell you, like on a personal level, I'm always a little bit weary when there are, you see sometimes the clips of the dancing and the this, which of course it's understood, but one also has to be conscious sometimes in the way that things appear in the world. And chas v'shalom, we would never want any type of equation between Klal Yisrael and other nations, because the notion of kind of people publicly celebrating with death is certainly something very associated with our enemies. But obviously an incredible nace, a nace nigla on so many different levels. So what is our avoda when we see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us such a miracle? So one of the things I've been thinking about over Shabbos a lot is this idea of sur meira v'yaseh tov. So of course, again, what David HaMelech was trying to teach us is that, and this is very apropos for this time of year, is that in order to fully self-actualize, a person has to remove the negativity and the obstacles from in their way. Right? We know Chazal have the famous adage of tovel v'sharetz biyado. A person can go to the mikvah, but if they're holding a sheretz, I'm holding a dead rodent in my hand, it doesn't matter how many times you go up and down in the water can't purify you because the source of impurity is embedded. It's right there, it's present. Masha'inkin, if you remove the impurity, then suddenly again the waters of the mikveh have the ability to go ahead and accomplish great things. So remove the negativity, the aseh tov, and then you could do good. And I thought about that, the Ribono Shel Olam, right? We had incredible, right? Our precious soldiers had such incredible siyata dishmaya, and they removed evil from this world. There was a pockets of evil that have been removed in this world. What a feeling it is to know that we wake up this morning in a world that has less evil. Evil still exists, and evil still has to be conquered, but objectively, there's less evil in this world because of us, because of Klal Yisrael. I said this from the beginning. Our people, we have the schus to be the tip of the spear to remove this evil, this scourge from humanity. There's less evil in the world because of us. So what do you do in this world when there's less evil? What do you do, so to speak, when there's a sur meira? Some of the ra has been taken away. It opens up the playing field for aseh tov. There's more room for more good. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us the siyata dishmaya to remove this evil, it's to open the door and to pave the way for more light, more beauty, more holiness, more goodness. Our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisroel are literally at the front lines of the war. We're still part of the camp, right? We're still part of Machane Yisrael. We're still part of Am Yisrael. We're also still part of the fighting force in our own way. And what we have the ability to contribute specifically in these days ahead, leading up to Yom Tovim, leading up to Yom Naraim, is the Aseh Tov. If the Ribbon Shalom has given our brothers and sisters the Siyata Dishmaya to remove the evil, then we have the obligation to fill that space with even more good, even more holiness, even more light. So as we go into these days before Rosh Hashanah, and Baruch Hashem, you feel it, right? If you tap into your neshama a little bit, you feel that there's a little less darkness and a little more light in this world. Let's ride that wave. Let's do something with that, and let's use this incredible opportunity to bring forth more Kedusha, to bring forth more holiness, to bring forth more light in these days leading up to Tavshin Peh. I thought, every year, has its own like Rashi Tevas, right? So what is Tavshin Peh? So maybe Tavshin Peh is Tehei Shnas Pirsum Hanes. There are so many miracles for Klal Yisrael, but so many times the miracles that happen for our people are like private miracles, right? They're like miracles embedded in Teva. And I think one of the tefillas that we have for HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, I don't want any more natural miracles. I love natural miracles, and we thank Hashem for them every single day in Modim. Va'anisecha shebechol yom imanu. We thank Hashem every single day for the miracles that we experience. Ribbon Shalom, thank you. I'm tired of everyday miracles. Tehei shnas pirsum hanes. I want pirsumei nisa. I want like a Chanukah, right? I want the hadlik ner shel Chanukah. That's what I want. I want those type of miracles, and I want them now, and I want them all the time. And if we could use these days where there's less darkness and fill that gap with more light, then in Meretz Hashem we will be zocheh to have a tremendous year filled with daily Persumei Nisa. Let's say with that, let us begin. So again, today's daf is Tzadik Vav, 96. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem. Let's actually back up just a little bit. Remember, after we got a little bit further, but let's back up to Tzadik in the base. He left off on 95b, but let's go there. Amar Rav Yehuda. So we'll say it is 5 lines up from the bottom. Amar Rav Yehuda. Yayin hanim kar bechanos mevarchin Allah borei pri agafen. So Rav Yehuda says wine that you sell in a store, so you make a borei pri agafen. Now we'll say, what's wine that you sold in a store? It's mamish. We have the same thing. We call it supermarket wine, right? So, what's supermarket wine? Supermarket wine is the stuff that when you get it, you regift it, right? In other words, I'm not opening it, I'm not touching it, I'm not using it. A lot of people use it for shalach manas, right? In other words, but this is it's fascinating. The dynamic of supermarket wine is not a new thing. It's not a new thing. So, yain animkar bechanos means wine. Let's take a look at the Rashbam. Wine that's sold in the store. Kilomer yayin ra mikol yonos and yenos hanin kar b'chanos. Now the truth is, so Rashbam says it's an inferior grade wine. So inferior grade wine. So Rabbi Yehuda says you still make Pri Agafen on it, even though it's inferior grade wine. And the Rashbam says over here why is that the chashiv peri v'lo mevrachin alav shakol niya b'dvara av agav desan v'akulam imber shakol niya b'dvara yatza. So again, Rabbi Yehuda's idea is that even inferior wine is still called wine. It's still called wine, and therefore halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and you make a borei pri hagafen. You make a borei pri hagafen on it. Fine, that's Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Rav Chisda Amar gamichamed akrim lamali. So Rav Chisda says, no. Why would you make a bracha borei pri hagafen on essentially spoiled wine? Spoiled wine. The Rasham says the akrim means yayin koses. Yayin koses means like it's like bubbling, frothing. So that was a sign that it was turning into vinegar. So essentially, again, so comes on Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says you make a bracha borei pri hagafen on regular wine, but an inferior wine or wine that is on its process, on its journey to spoilage, you would not make a bracha of borei pri hagafen. Now, what would you do? If you look at the Rashbam, Lamali, he says, "Levarich halav ela shakol niya b'dvaro." Again, so to be clear, obviously, Rav Chisda is not suggesting you don't make a bracha on it. I will say it is still drinkable. It is still drinkable. So because it's still drinkable, you have to make a bracha on it. But l'maisa, what bracha will you make? Shakol niya b'dvaro, and not borei pri hagafen. So fundamental machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Chisda about what bracha do you make on wine that has begun its journey towards spoilage. So again, Rabbi Yehuda says it's still wine borei pri hagafen. Rabbi Yehuda, it's still wine borei pri hagafen. Rav Chisda shakol niya b'dvaro. So it says the Gemara, Meisi Reiza Kasha. So what happens if you have bread that is rotting, wine that is spoiling, and food that's spoiling? Omer shakol niya b'dvaro. Ultimately, you say shakol niya b'dvaro. I just want to point out, just in terms of hilchos brachas. So this must be dealing with what? What are these cases where the food is technically still edible, right? It's still edible. If something is not edible at all, you don't make a bracha. But if it's edible, you make a bracha. You make a bracha. So the Gemara says, Amrav Zvid. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that when stuff is on the process of, it is spoiled or in the process of spoiling, you don't make the regular bracha. In other words, you don't make the hamotzi on the bread, but rather, again, you don't make the agafen on the wine, rather make shackle. So this seems to support the position of Rav Chisda, Kasha Rav Yehuda, Amrav Zvid, Mod Rav Yehuda, Bepurtsama de Mizdaben Akarnosa. So no, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that perhaps this is referring to the following case. This is referring to wine that is sold at like street corners. The Rashbam says over here, Purtsama yain ra yosem osanim kabachanos. So this is even worse than supermarket wine. Shino nimkar ella bikronos ha'ir beparshas drachim. This was wine sold at like the crossroads. So, in other words, I guess this would be like, this is like gas station wine. There's supermarket wine and there's gas station wine. So this is mamish like gas station wine over here. It's even more inferior. Sheyesh sham lokhin harbe ve'imedaktikin ma yiknu. So it's interesting. So apparently, again, remember, you have to also understand, you have to relate to wine differently, right? In other words, we think about who's can you imagine like you're driving, like you're traveling, like I'm so thirsty, to stop off for a glass of wine, right? So in other words, we use wine very differently, right? So again, wine was their common drink of choice. So because of that, again, this was gas station wine, on the road, at the crossroads, somebody would be selling wine, a highly inferior product. Even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that type of wine gets a shackle. So again, essentially you have, according to Rabbi Yehuda, kind of three different categories of wine. There's what we'll call regular wine, and then there is supermarket wine and gas station wine. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, regular wine, supermarket wine will get hagafen. It's only once you get to the level of gas station wine, then now we're making a shahakol. Fascinating. So I said to Rabbi Yosef, was it incredible? So Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Chisda, Markman Sriole. So I said to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi, so now we have these two positions. There is Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Chisda, right? So Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you're going to make a hagafen even on wine that is spoiling, and Rav Chisda who says that you make a shahakol. So Mar Keman Svirale. Rabbi Yosef, who do you hold like? Amrale, Masnisi Yedano. So this is very interesting. So Rav Yosef says, the truth is, I know a brisa. Let's answer the brisa. We'll say, by the way, this is a fascinating idea. That here, right, Abai is asking Rav Yosef, Rebbe, there's machlokes, who do you paskin like? So what does Rav Yosef say? Like, just answer the question. So what does Rav Yosef say? Rav Yosef says, I'll answer you from a brisa. So I'll say there's a profound Musar Haskell in this, which is, in life, if you're going to espouse an opinion, make sure it's informed. A lot of times we say things, right, and they're not necessarily based on any level of fact. They're not necessarily supported by any level of information. And we espouse ideas, and we espouse hashkafas, and we espouse isms, and all these different kinds of things. And we think that because often we're in an echo chamber of other people who may be saying the same stuff or espousing the same stuff, that it must be right. That's not the way a yid operates. If you're going to say something, make sure it's grounded in some level of emes. So it's fascinating. So Abaye asks Rav Yosef, who do you paskin like? Rav Yosef doesn't just say, Rav Chisda, Rav Yehuda, show you a brisa. I'll show you a brisa. Let's work with facts. Let's work with information, and then let's develop an approach based on those facts. Such an important Musar Haskell for how we approach life, and how our hashkafas, and how our ideologies, and how our thoughts have to be formed by true facts, especially by Torah facts. So the Gemara goes right to look at that top of Tzadik Vav 96a. The Sanya. Here we go. Well, so this is actually a fascinating case. Everything go. Oh. We are not covered. We are not covered. You crushed it. You literally crushed it. Oh, you broke it. You demolished it. Okay. Seriously, Dafyomi has become a full contact sport over here. All right, so listen. Yeah, don't put that. No, I want to see what happens. Over here. This is very riveting. So the Gemara says as follows. So you're not putting in a claim against the shul for that, are you? I just want to make sure. So the Gemara says as follows. Top of Tzadik Vav. So the Sanya, we'll say, here we go. Top of Tzadik Vav. The Sanya. Habodik es achavis lios marfer shalat trumas. We'll say this is a very interesting case, right? I have barrels of wine. So now what happens? You have to separate out trumas and maasros on wine. So there's this interesting model, which is instead of having to go ahead and separate out trumas and truma on every single barrel of wine, instead what I do is I have a truma barrel. A truma barrel. So let's say, for argument's sake, I know the truma barrel has, 20 gallons in it. So I know, let's say each barrel is whatever. So and in my mind, I keep track of designating the wine in the truma barrel as wine. And again, you could do that. Halacha l'maaseh again. So I have my truma barrel, and every time I'm drinking from, I open up another barrel of wine. I say, okay, the truma for this barrel should be chal on my truma barrel. Beautiful. So now everything is fine, except watch this. Oh, watch this. So now everything is going great. Everything is going great in life. Until one day what happens, I decide to go ahead. So now I'm drinking wine, life is good, making l'chaims, separating out truma on my truma barrel. Everything is fine, except one day I decide to look in to check on my truma barrel. And I discover that what? My truma barrel is vinegar. It's turned to vinegar. Now the halacha is, you cannot separate out vinegar as truma for wine. That does not work. So what's my problem? Now what's my problem? Right? Just this problem, not in general, right? What's my problem? My problem is I don't know when the wine turned. So let's say for argument's sake, I had been using this truma barrel, I don't know, for 6 months. Which is certainly possible and feasible. I've been using this barrel for months. So now, and I've been separating out truma for other barrels on this barrel. So now, all I know now is I found it and it's vinegar, but I don't know when it turned. So what does that mean about all of my designations over the last 6 months? So what's talacha? So the Brisa says, Kol gimul yom, vaday, mikan ve'ilach safek. All 3 days, you can be assured that the wine was good wine. Afterwards, it's a safek. So the Gemara says, "My kamar, what does that mean?" But I have no idea what that means. So also here we go. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, here's what it means. Safek kamar. Kol gimel yom harishonim vadayayin mikan ve'ilach safek. So Rabbi Yochanan, so we're going to see a couple of interpretations of this phrase. Rabbi Yochanan says like this. The halacha is as follows. For the first 3 days, ultimately again, now what does it mean for the first 3 days? So let's just say for argument's sake, I went ahead and I check my wine. Last time, right, I designated my barrel, or it doesn't have to be the original designation, but I designated the barrel on the 25th of Elul. Yesterday. It's a good date, right? I didn't even mention it, but the 25th of Elul is actually, this past Shabbos, is the first day of creation. Remember, Rosh Hashanah celebrates the creation of Adam, of man, which means the world was created. The first day of creation was this past Shabbos. It's always fascinating when the first day of creation falls out on a Shabbos. Right? Right? Shabbos is the cessation of, I think it goes back to what we were saying before, which is, it's such a beautifully dramatic siman. When creation happens on Shabbos, that means that this year is going to be that Pir Samanes. This is the Tafshin Pei. This is this is going to be a year where things just happen differently. Shabbos is normally the day where there is no creation. This is the year where Shabbos, the first Shabbos, is started creation. And Hashem, we have to brace for incredibly beautiful and wonderful and fantastic things. So the Gemara says as follows. So let's say for argument's sake, I went ahead and I designated the barrel on the 25th of Elul. And then what happens? I check it, I don't know, Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. Right? So more than a month goes by and then I check it. Now it's turned to vinegar. Rabbi Yochanan says like this. The only time that you know for sure that halachically you could rely on the fact that this was wine is essentially the day that you checked it and 3 days later. So you've got 3 days from the time that you checked it, the 25th, the 26th, the 27th of Elul. Those days you could be sure that it was wine. But the Ret Nabos say, now what about the rest of the time? What about the rest of the time? It's safek. Now again, remember, I don't know. I don't know what happened, but I also know that I can't definitively rely on the fact that it was wine. So for the first 3 days after you checked it, then you could rely that it's wine. After that, it's a safek. Nabos say, what do you do with the safek? What do you do with the safek? You have to retithe, because if you have a safek d'oraisa, you have to go to chumrah, right? Doubting the biblical law, you have to resolve it. So let's take a look at the Rashman for just a moment. Call Gil Yom Rishonim. I want to say, by the way, I just want to point out, this is so incredible, because remember, again, just think about this. This is such a halacha l'maisa case. Again, halavai will always zocher to have wine cellars, right? With barrels of wine. I'm just saying, like, this is such a great case, such a shaykh case. Look at the Rashbam. Kol gil yom rishonim samuch lebedika vada yayin the pachos migimol yomim ein hayayin naaseh chometz. Now, where does 3 come from? So the Rashbam says that wine, if you check on wine and it's good, it takes at least 3 days for it to turn into vinegar. So in other words, so you could be sure that if you checked on the 25th of Elul and that wine was good wine, for the next 3 days you are absolutely in the clear. So that's a fact that the Gemara is operating with, that the transition between vinegar and wine ultimately takes 3 days. Which I will say, by the way, is also such a profound yisod as well. Wine doesn't become vinegar instantaneously. In life, a tzaddik doesn't just become a rasha. It takes time to sour. And I will say this is incredibly important in our personalistic tshuva journey as well. Because a lot of times, if we're honest, I started as wine, but then when I kind of lift up the hood, I look under the lid of the barrel, I find vinegar. So it's important to understand that didn't just happen. There's a process, and part of tshuva is understanding how did my wine become vinegar? What happens? Now, sometimes wine becomes vinegar simply because of sheer neglect. I just didn't take care of the wine. Sometimes the atmosphere, the conditions around the wine are not the right ones to preserve the wine, allow it to become vinegar. But whatever it is, it's important to understand. This is Rabbi Silber. I've quoted this many times. Rabbi Silber highlights that in the world of sin, there's 2 pieces. There's the chet, the sin, and there's derech chotim, the pathway to sin. Sin doesn't just poof occur. Chet occurs as a result of a variety of different smaller decisions, lifestyle decisions, chevra decisions, turns in different directions. And part of tshuva, you see the mistake we make, is we often think that tshuva is just the cessation of sin. But it's not true. Tshuva is identifying the pathway. How did I get here? And now figuring out how can I prevent myself from going down that road. Wine doesn't just become vinegar. There's a process. I don't just simply fall into a state of disrepair. There's a process. Tshuva is figuring out how did the wine, what happened over those, so to speak, 3 days? What happened over that process? How did my beautiful holy wine somehow sour into vinegar? If I could figure that out, then in Yeretz Hashem I could correct it. I also say, here's the beautiful part. At least it's not this way in the physical world, but it's true in Hashkafa. Although wine cannot instantaneously become vinegar, but in the world of Ruchnius, vinegar could instantaneously become wine. And that is the most beautiful thing. Rav Kook speaks about this concept. He says in the world of tshuva, we really have to do the daf today, but there's in the world of tshuva, there's 2 different types of tshuva. There's tshuva hadragis, which means like incremental tshuva, and tshuva pitomis. So Rav Kook highlights this concept. Instantaneous change, profound, dramatic, cathartic, instantaneous change is absolutely possible. Even if I am vinegar in this moment, I absolutely could turn myself into wine. Okay, but let's go back to this. Rabbi Yochanan therefore says, Rabbi Yochanan says like this: you could essentially rely on the fact that the wine in the barrel was wine for the first 3 days. After 3 days, it's suffik, and you'd have to retithe everything after the first 3 days. What's the reason? My taima chamra me'iloy akar. So Rabbi Yochanan says that in the souring process, was that the right term? Souring process, fermentation, not really from our souring process, the vinegarization process. What happens? The wine spoils from the top. Right? And ultimately, again, v'haitimi v'lo akar. And ultimately, again, so I tasted it when I've checked it, and it was fine, which means that for those first 3 days, it's absolutely okay, but after that, it's going to be a suffix. Incredible. Let's go back to so imtim salomar bas. So the Gemara says, imtim salomar basar ti'ima akar. Furthermore, again, and if you want to say that maybe after I tasted it, maybe it turned. Even so, that would be a case of recha chala, where ultimately the scent is vinegar, v'tamei chamra, but it tastes like wine. Rabbi Yochanan holds v'chol recha chala v'tamei chamra. Anything that smells like vinegar but tastes like wine still has the status of wine. Shabbos says, therefore, this is the position of Rabbi Yochanan, that halacha l'maisa, the Brisa says that essentially you could rely on the fact that the barrel was still wine for the first 3 days after you checked it, but after that it is going to be a safek. Rabbi Shimon Levi Amar. Rabbi Shimon Levi has a different approach. He says, Kol Gimel Yomim Achronim Vaday Chometz. Shabbos Rabbi Shimon Levi understands the Brisa differently. He says, no, the Brisa is teaching me like this. The last 3 days. Now, what's the last 3 days? Remember, again, let's assume that I'm checking this barrel on the Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. So he says, the last 3 days, since you checked it, those last 3 days, if you find it vinegar, I assume that it was vinegar for the 3 previous days. Right? Mikanu la'alon safek. What about before the 3 days? Which also means that I know for sure that anything I tied in the last 3 days before checking the barrel is absolutely unequivocally it was vinegar, and therefore the tithing is not good. Anything before those 3 days is safek. My time, what's his logic? Chamra mitasai akar. He holds that the wine really spoils from the bottom of the barrel. Ve'emar akar v'lav adaite. And therefore it's possible that the wine spoiled and the owner was not even aware of this. V'imtim salamar me'ilai akar v'hat ti'imei v'lo akar. But you'll say maybe it spoils from the top and he tasted it and it wasn't spoiled. Dilma Basra ti'ima akar. Maybe it began to spoil after he tasted it. In this case, it would be the same thing. It would be a situation of where the scent, the smell is vinegar, but the taste is wine. And Rabbi Yeshua, this case of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yeshua holds that wine that has a scent of vinegar, but a taste of wine, is still considered to be vinegar. The rabbis of the south, Duromai means like Durham, south. The rabbis of the south, they taught this halakha in Rishon Levi, and they said as follows. This is incredible. Rishonim vaday yayin, achronim vaday chometz, emtsaim safek. So they had an interesting position. They held that the first days, you could definitely rely on the fact that the wine is wine. The final days, you have to assume that it's definitely vinegar. And some, the middle days, are going to be safek. Are going to be doubtful. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. So this doesn't make any sense. First of all, we'll say, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. It's in the widest lines, about 2, 4, 6, about 8, 9 lines down in the widest lines. So listen to this. Diramai mishpei Rabbi Yeshua, Amrin da haydik tani bebraisa gimel yamim vaday, bein agimel yamim rishon bein agimel achronim. So I'll say, here's what's interesting. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan is focusing on the first 3 days, Rabbi Shmuel Levi is focusing on the last 3 days. The Diramai, or actually according to Rabbi Shmuel Levi, they say the Brisa actually refers to the first 3 days and the last 3 days. And watch this. Vachi Kamar, I'm reading in the Rashbam. Gimel Yamim Harishon Vadayayin Tafilum Silak Yado Hiskila Hachmitz Haverecha V'Kala V'Tame Chamra Gimel Yamim Hilcha Chavi Chamra. So let's listen to this. So therefore the Diramai is like this. For the first 3 days, we can assume that that's absolutely good wine. Why? Because even if it began to turn and it has a smell of vinegar, wine that has the smell of vinegar and the taste of wine is considered to be wine. Next Rashbam, Achron Vadei Chometz, but the last 3 days is certainly vinegar. So the Rashbam says, okay, so we'll get to that. We'll get to that in just a second. Shabbos says, so this is the Diramai approach. First 3 days, Vadei wine. Last 3 days, Vadei vinegar. And everything in the middle, Saveh. The Gemara says, here's the problem. It doesn't make sense. Contradiction. Amrit Rishon Vadayayin. So he said the first 3 days, it's certainly wine. Alma Reiche Chalavatame Chamra Chamra. That means that you hold that wine that has the scent of vinegar but the taste of wine is considered to be wine. But then you said the last 3 days ultimately again is vinegar. Therefore you hold that if wine has the scent of wine, but even the scent of vinegar but the taste of wine, chala, ultimately again it's vinegar. So which one is it? It's inherently contradictory. Tush the Gemara says, no, it's not. Kigon, dishtachich chala sefiska. Sefiska. So we'll say, it's interesting. Sefiska means when you go ahead, when I check this barrel on Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, I will say, apparently again, this was strong. Sefiska means very strong vinegar. If you look at the Rashbam says over here, Kigon da ashkach, the olam reiche chala v'tamei chamra, chamrahu. In general, Basra, we would say that wine that has the scent of vinegar, but the taste of wine is considered to be wine. And what's going on over here? So the Ma'iri Kigon dishtachach chometz chazak yoser midai shadavar yadua shezeh vav yam mishitzchil hachnis. So Basra, so we're talking about over here the Diramai referring to a case where the wine, when you uncover the wine, the vinegar is so strong that it is clear that it has been vinegar at least for the last 3 days. So that's when they say that, again, in this case, you could assume it was wine for the first 3 days, vinegar for sure in the last 3 days, and then suffix for the remaining days. Very interesting. Go in the shaka chala sefiska. Sefiska. Di lav da akar tlasa yomi lo hav mishkacha chala sefiska. Sefiska. So I'll say, were it not the fact that the wine must have totally turned over the last 3 days. Otherwise, the vinegar would not be so strong. So, okay, now we have these 3 opinions. I will say, by the way, this is a very important halacha. So now the Gemara says, okay, who do you paskin like? So, who does that halacha follow? So, Pli'ibar Amari V'Rav Zvid, Cham Amar Rabbi Yochanan, V'Chad Amar Yeshua ben Levi. So, I'll say, one opinion said we hold like Rabbi Yochanan, and remember, what was Rabbi Yochanan's position? Rabbi Yochanan held that you could only assume the barrel was good for the first 3 days after checking it. And one says it's like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that the barrel is pretty much suffix up until the last 3 days, where it's vadai chomer. So both say. So this is interesting. So how do we paskin halacha l'maisa? So listen to this. So the Rambam writes, this is in Hilchos Trumos, Perek Hey Halacha Chav Dalet. Here it is. Get ready for it. Habodek esachavis. Ve'nicha lahafisha truma alacherim ashete asa kula truma v'yitan kohen. We'll say, by the way, just as an aside, how would this work? I have wine, and so I set aside a barrel that's going to be my truma barrel. So remember, I will say, what do you do with it? You keep on designated as truma until when? Now, obviously, you have to track this, right? You have to track. This is not like hocus pocus. You are hereby truma, right? In other words, this is specific amounts of wine designated for other barrels. Once the whole thing becomes truma, then what happens? You give it to the Kohen. That is the way to make good friends, right? Can you imagine you show up to the Kohen with that barrel of wine, mamish? So afterwards, give it to the Kohen. So I'm just listen to this. I then check my truma barrel, and it turns out that now it is vinegar. So here we go. So here it is. Me'ez shebatka tchila ad shlosha yamim vaday yayin. So the Rambam says, whatever the last date that you checked it, and you can imagine you would probably write like on the side of the barrel, last inspected 25th of Elul. So the Rambam says, from that date, ad shlosh yamim vada yayin. V'chol yayin shechashav osan yam truma shelo b'chavis harizem utukan. Mikan ve'elech safek v'tzarech lahafrish b'menu truma shniya. So I'll say, the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yochanan. In this case, where the wine turned, and we don't know when. Essentially, what we say is, when was the last day you did an inspection? 3 days after that, we assume it's vadayayin. So any truma separated during those days is good, but anything separated after that is suffix, is going to have to be retithed. That's halacha l'maisa. I'm sorry?
What bracha? Rabbi Yossi was asking what bracha.
Oh, sorry. So the truth is, from a Hilchos brachos perspective, I will say we paskin that once wine has begun to turn to vinegar, shakol ni'avid vara. That's how we paskin Hilchos brachos. Good. Says the Gemara as follows: Itmar, hamocher chavisayin lechavera. So we'll say another interesting case. So now we're switching gears a little bit, and we're switching gears from truma to mechira. We're going now to halachas mekach and memkar. Monetary law. So listen to this. So Amarav, I'm sorry. Itmar hamocher chavas yayin lechavero. I sell a barrel of wine to Ruvain v'chmitza, and we'll say after selling him the barrel of wine, so the wine spoiled. Now the Rashbam adds in a very important detail over here. Look what he writes. It's about 8 lines up from the bottom. Hamocher chavis yayin lechavero v'chmitza b'soch osa chavis shel mocher bebeis lokeach. So the way this is working is as follows, and you're going to see. We'll see in the Rambam why this is an important point. So listen to this. I sell Reuven a barrel of wine. Now, what am I selling him? What am I selling it to him in? What am I selling it to him in? My barrel. In other words, I have the barrel of wine. We're going to see essentially there's 2 different kinds of cases. Case number 1 is where Reuven comes to me, I sell him wine, and I pour the wine into his kli. Right? That's not this case. This case over here is I'm selling Reuven a barrel of wine. So I'm selling him the barrel. Here's the barrel. Take the wine. And then what happens? After it's in his possession, the wine spoils. So what's the halacha? So Amarav, Kol Gimel Yom HaRishon B'Rishus Mocher, Mikan Ve'elech B'Rishus Lokeach. So I'll say, Rav says something very interesting. If spoilage occurs within 3 days after the sale, I, the seller, bear the responsibility. It's essentially like a mekach tos, right? Like a mekach tos, and he gets his money back, which is fascinating. So, right, it's been 3 days in his possession, but if the spoilage occurs within 3 days, now obviously all these cases presuppose that what? That there was no negligence on the part of Reuven, right? Reuven bought a barrel of wine and he forgot it in his car for 3 days, and it was 90 degrees. So okay, no, that's not the mekach. But assuming that Reuven did his part, and halacha l'maisa again. Suppose Rav says that's my responsibility. Take a look at the Rashbam. Now, what's the logic? Amrav kol gimel yom rishon harei u'k'merishus mocher shadavar yodua she'ein hayayin machmitz bepachos migimel yamim. Everyone knows that wine doesn't spoil in less than 3 days. Mishehischil ha'reach chometz. Shabbos says, so it's interesting, and this goes back to what we saw before. Wine is still drinkable even when it smells a little vinegary. Right? So, and this is not just when you're desperate in yeshiva, right? This is true, right? In general, right? So wine is still consumable even when the smell begins to turn a little bit. So therefore the Rashbam says over here, he says, so therefore Rav is of the opinion that Allah l'maisa, if within 3 days after buying this wine, the wine turned, that means that it was already sufficiently decayed, right? Sufficiently vinegarized already in my reshus before I went ahead and I sold it, and therefore really has the right to get his money back. I'm a base. Shmuel says, no, chamra akasva demare shavar. So what Shmuel says, literally translated, wine rides on the shoulders of its owner, which is another way of saying, once you sell the wine and the buyer takes possession, there's no achrayis. How do you explain the souring of the wine? So Shmuel says, it's the mazel of Reuven. Reuven's mazel caused the souring of the wine. So once I look at the Rashbam, Shmuel says, Eino chai b'achri yusol, af api shehichnis b'soch abayis, b'soch chabis shalmocher. And I remember, what's interesting to note about this is I'm selling Reuven the wine in my barrel, and now it vinegarizes in 3 days. Shmuel says, Mishum, the chamra agaba de gavra shavra, akase fa'adam medali, kilomar, mazlo garam, chet shal balabayis yain. So this is very interesting. So Shmuel says it's just the bad mazel of Reuven. Just the bad mazel of Reuven that caused the wine to sour. It's your mazel. Your mazel. What's I just point out, by the way, always very important, whenever one of the things we always have to be very careful about is always associating what we appear to be negative circumstances with necessarily culpability. In other words, we do have the concept of tzaddik v'ralo. We have the concept of bad things happening to good people. So in other words, here Reuven bought the wine, and now it's spoiled. So it's easy to say, Reuven, obviously bad mazel, your wine's spoiled. So it says, remember again, you can link this back. So spoiling wine doesn't necessarily have to be bad mazel. If you remember again, we had the Gemara that you're not allowed to export staples from Eretz Yisroel. Not the expense to us. Sorry, I don't remember who the Gemara quoted, but there was an opinion that said that you are allowed to export wine. Why could you export wine? Because yayin is maybe lidei tiflis. Wine gets people into a lot of trouble, especially when it comes to morality, immorality. And therefore, what? It's good to get wine out of Eretz Yisroel. It could be that sometimes when your wine goes bad, maybe what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, you know what? I'm giving you a Pesach for a little more Kedusha. Sometimes in life, when things don't go right for us, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying, I'm taking this thing off your plate so that you have the ability to focus on something different. So sometimes when the wine goes bad, ultimately it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying, there's less wine in your life, and now there's a lot more room for something else. So mazlo gara means, it's your mazel that caused it. But it may not be a punishment, and it may not be a bad thing. It may just be a divine redirect, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu just needs me to not focus on this, and needs me to focus on something else. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Avar Rav Yosef uzda kavasei d'Rav b'shichra v'kavasei d'Shmuel b'chamra. So this is fascinating. Rav Yosef pasking like Rav when it came to beer. when it came to beer. Namely, that if the beer spoiled within 3 days, so ultimately, again, the buyer has the ability to go back to the seller and get back his money. But he paskin like Shmuel when it comes to wine. That ultimately, again, once you sell wine, we're done. No backseas, right? No mekachtos, that's it. The halacha follows Shmuel that once the product is sold, ultimately, again, the transaction is final and you can't go back. We should both say, by the way, it's actually not a chiddush because we begin to see this more and more often. What is the Gemara essentially saying? Whenever it comes to monetary law, what's the guiding light principle? What's the guiding light principle? Hamotzi mechaver alav araya. That's it. So in other words, so I sold Ruvain wine, and now I sold it within 3 days. So again, if Reuven wants to prove that I sold him defective merchandise, does he have the ability to do that? Of course, but then he's got to build a case. In other words, that's on him to prove that is actually the situation. So the truth is, the Rambam brings down this halacha as well, Hilchos Mechira, Perek Zayin Halacha Gimel. Now again, in the Rambam's lashon, the Rambam actually accepts this distinction between beer and wine. So the Rambam says, "Amocher chaver shel sheikha lechaver v'achaver shel mocher ve'echmitza b'sov shloshi yamim harishonim hareizer b'shus mocher u'machzir hadamim." So the Rambam says, if you buy, I guess a barrel of beer, you buy a barrel of beer, right? A keg. Sounds so goyish. All right, so it's all right. So, Yidden don't drink kegs. I drink a barrel, right? So again, so I go ahead, right, and I buy a barrel of beer. And now again, it goes ahead and it spoils within 3 days. So the Rambam says we pass halacha l'maisa like Rav in that case, mekach tos, I get my money back. Now what about wine? He says, hamochi yayin lechavero u'nesar lokech bekan kanav ve'echmitz miyad eno chayiv b'achriyuso. So the Rambam says, halacha l'maisa, we paskin that with wine, halacha l'maisa, again, once you sell it, the sale is done, and again, no backsies. Ultimately accepting this position of Shmuel, that it's the mazel of the purchaser that caused this. Now, the Rambam's halacha is a bit more involved and intricate. We're not going to do it, because the Rambam actually gets into, if we know the reason why the purchaser bought the wine. Is this cooking wine, or is this consumption wine? The Rambam is mechalik a little bit like that, but we're not going to delve into it. But suffice it for us to see that the Rambam ultimately paskins like Rav when it comes to beer and like Shmuel when it comes to wine. Incredible. Let's go back to Tan Rabbanon. Echad sheichar tamarim ve'echad sheichar sa'orim ve'echad shmar yayin mevarchen aleim shakol niyeh b'dvara. So we'll say back to Ilchos Brachos. Listen to this. So whether it comes, so we'll say sheichar tamarim is date beer, sheichar sa'orim is barley beer, or shmar yayin. I will say now, shmar yayin. Now, what's the chap with all of these things? Take a look at what's shmar yayin. So the Rashbam says shmar yayin hu temed. So we'll say there was this temed. Temed was an inferior type of wine drink. How did you make temed? He says shenosin ma'im agabi shmarim u'masmidin osa b'shosin osan. So we'll say, so how would you make temed? Essentially, after you finish making wine, by going ahead and squeezing grapes, you would have grape pulp. There's grape pulp. What would you do then? You would pour water on the grape pulp and you soak the grape pulp. That resulting drink was called temed. So it wasn't. So the Gemara is suggesting over here, the right suggesting is it's not wine. All of these items are considered to be right. In other words, the whole chap over here is sheichar tamarim. So again, date. Thank you. So date beer doesn't have the status of dates, and therefore it's not going to get a ha'etz. And barley beer doesn't have the status of barley, therefore it's not going to get a hadama. And temed doesn't have the status of wine, and therefore it's not going to get the hagafen. All of these drinks get the bracha of shakol. Look at the Rashbam. Shakol niyeh b'dvaro. Avalo brei pre'etz b'sheichar tamarim. Right. So date beer doesn't become brei pre'etz. V'lo brei pre'adama ubore minei mezonos al sheichar sa'orin. Delo chashivi. All of these, so we'll say, these drinks essentially are not considered to be halachically connected to their point of origin. Right, so date beer doesn't really have a halachic connection to the date, and ultimately barley beer doesn't have a halachic connection to the barley, and temed doesn't have a halachic connection to the grapes or to the grape dregs. Acherim said no. Shmarim sheyesh b'hem tam yayin mevarech alein brei pri hagafen. So the Acherim disagree. The Acherim say, listen, if you go ahead and you soak this water with the wine pulp, and at the end of the day, the resulting liquid tastes like wine, that's Ber Piragavim. That is Ber Piragavim. So they argue on Ber Piragavim. So also now watch this. So now the Gemara is going to frame the machlokas a little bit. Rabba of Rav Yosef Tamar Tarvayu ein halacha ka'achirim. Rabba and Rav Yosef said the halacha does not follow achirim, and therefore again halacha lamaisa with this temed, with this water that's soaked with the wine dregs, you're going to make a shahakol, not a hagafim. So here we go. Both say, watch this. Amar Rabba, this is really interesting. Tichuli Alma. Rama tlasa va'asa arba chamer. Rabbi say, now watch this. So let's go with the temed case, right? So I have this grape pulp, right? It's sitting in my pitcher, sitting in my barrel. So let's listen to this. So Rabbi says as follows: if I go ahead and I take 3 cups of water, and I introduce it into the wine dregs, right, into the wine pulp, and then what happens? Rabbi say, I pour off the mixture, and I come out with what? 4 cups of liquid. 4 cups of liquid, which essentially means the 3 cups of the water were able to draw out an additional cup of, right, a cup of liquid from the wine dregs. Then I will say, what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, everyone agrees, chamrhu. Everyone agrees that this resulting mixture is wine. Now we'll say, now why? Why is that? Rava l'tamei da'amar Rava kol chamra d'lo dori al chad tlas mai elav chamra. Rabbi say, remember again, we've seen this many times, which is that halach l'maisa in Gemara, their water to wine ratio was 3 parts water to 1 part wine. So essentially, the Gemara is saying like this: if I have this wine pulp, right, this grape pulp, these grape dregs, and I pour 3 cups of water into it, and I emerge afterwards, I pour off the mixture, and it's 4 cups of liquid. Essentially, the halacha looks at that is 1 cup of wine to 3 parts of water. That's wine. That's wine, and therefore again, that mixture will be what? Borei pri hagafen. Take a look at that Hasham for just a moment. Rama tlasa, the Hasham says, Kosos mayim va'aisi nami tlasa, v'lo yosa, afal pi shish botam yayin, d'choli alma, lo pligi v'lo kloma, afilu achirim. I'm sorry, we're going to get to that. Sorry, getting ahead of ourselves. So we'll say that's case 1. So case 1 is, I pour 3 cups of water onto the wine dregs, and I get out 4 cups of liquid. That's wine. The resulting mixture is wine. Next case, Rama tlasa v'asa tlasa, v'lo klumu. Obviously, if I pour in 3 cups of water and get what? 3 cups back. What is that, Rabbi? What is that? Water. Now, by the way, it's not regular water, right? It's going to be colored water, and it might even have like a little taste of wine. But clearly, again, what you put in is what you got out, right? And therefore, again, shakol niya b'dvaro. Again, we're not getting into brachas right now. We're just getting into identity, right? This is not a bracha discussion yet. This is an identity discussion. So right now, you put in 3 cups of water, you get the same 3 cups out, even though its coloration is different, its taste may be different. That's called water. So keep give us listen to this. Where does machlokes come up? The Rama tlasa v'asa tlasu palga. So I'll say, where does the machlokes come up? I pour in 3 cups of water, and I get out 3.5. So now watch this. D'Rabbanan savri tlasa ayil tlasa nafik. So the Rabbanan look at it like this. You put in 3, right, and I get out 3.5 cups of water. So the Rabbanan say like this. Okay, how do we understand this? I put in 3, right? So the first 3 that I got out, what is that? That's my water. The additional half is now what we look at as a half a cup of wine. So what do I have in this mixture? I have palga upalga shisa. So essentially, I will say I have 1/2 a cup of wine and 6 half cups of water, right? 3 cups of water. So I have 1/2 a cup of wine, 6 half cups of water. I will say, what's the halacha when you have a ratio like that? So the Gemara says, palgo, nothing like pashle palgo, upalga b'shisa, palgimai velo klum. So we'll say ultimately, so I have 1/2 a cup of water, 1/2 a cup of wine with 6 half cups of water. What's the status of that combination? What's the status? Water. In other words, we'll say wine in that ratio will be bottled, and therefore that mixture is considered to be water. Now listen, watch this. Achirim sabri, the achirim hold differently. Right? The achirim say like this. Sabri, tlasa'ol, trei upalganafik. So I will say this is fascinating. The achirim say like this. When you pour in 3 cups of water on the dregs, so essentially what we say is like this. Really, 2.5 cups of water came out. Look at this, 2.5 cups of water came out. And then what? And then the addition, but there's 3.5 cups of liquid. So we look at it as if 2.5 cups of water came out, and the remaining additional cup is what? Is wine. and therefore what? Upalgi nafik, pashle kuza, the kuza betrayal palgi chamra ma'ayu. So what do I have? Rabbi? So essentially I have 1 cup of wine, 2.5 cups of water. What's the status of 1 cup of wine with 2.5 cups of water? It's wine. It's wine, and therefore they will hold that mixture ultimately, again, is a wine mixture. So I will say, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says over here, V'achirim sarvi tzlasa, mayim ol, utrei upalga mayim nofik. De'ein haderech lotzeis, kol hanichnas, ela min hamayim nisharu, v'otziu hayayin de peri kafimana. Now, I've also listened to this. Now, what does that mean, right? What does that mean? That I poured in 3 and 2.5 came out and the additional cup is wine. The Achirim hold like this. When you pour wine into dregs, I will say one thing is clear, which is not everything that you poured in comes out. Some of the liquid remains in the dregs. So here's what I know. But yet I know that at the end of the day, I got out more than what I put in. So in the Achirim, they understand the mechanics of this work as follows. If I pour in 3 cups, what that means is, so okay, 3 cups of water went in. I know mitchila, that's what? So again, in their math, in their ratio, I know for sure that for every 3 cups of wine that I pour onto the dregs, right, what am I getting out? In a normal situation, what am I getting out? 2.5. That's what I'm getting out, right? Because 1/2 of water is going to, 1/2 a cup of water is going to remain absorbed within the dregs. But now, nisim in the flows, I got what? I got 3.5 cups out. So the way the Achirim look at that ultimately is how? Is we look at that as 2.5 cups of water, because that's what happens, right? 3 cups of water go in, 2.5 cups come out, and that additional cup that came out is wine. And therefore, according to the Achirim, that gives me a ratio of 1 cup wine to 2.5 cups of water, which halacha l'maisa again is a ratio to create a wine identity, and therefore they will hold that mixture is considered to be wine. So we'll say we'll stop over here for today, right? We're not finished. So again, I will say we have shaylas about brachas, right? And now we have shaylas about ratios. And Miras Hashem, resolution to both of those things tomorrow. What a tremendous start to the week, everyone. Shkoyach. Chevron Zoom. Shkoyach, everyone. Have a great day.